So we will continue with the next panel. The next panel is on the Greek energy market development. So the next panel will be in Greek. And I will now invite two distinguished MPs. They are from opposition parties, both dealing with energy. I will begin with Mrs. Peti Perka. She is a member of parliament from Florina, and she will talk to us about the view of SYRIZA in relation to the environment and energy. And then we will have Mr. Arvanitidis from KIN.AL on the same subject, and then we will have a panel discussion. I give the floor to Mrs. Peti Perka. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I wish you the very best of success in your symposium. These discussions are always fruitful. They always have a good outcome. I will begin by saying that the pandemic added one more challenge and one more uncertainty to the challenge of the century, which is climate crisis. But at the same time, we have an opportunity offered by the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which together with the funds of the new programming period, 2021-2027, could be an opportunity for the reconstruction of the Greek economy while incorporating digital transformation and green transition, two ambitious objectives. Of course, energy is at the very center of this great change. So the time at which the symposium is being held is very timely, very topical, because the main items on the agenda in the political scene are changes in the energy market and the energy crisis. I will begin with a burning issue of our days. I'm talking about the capital share increase, capital equity increase, capital of the PPC. So we see that the super fund and the HRADF will not add capital, so the public will lose the majority. So this was a sudden decision by the government without any prior information, because Mr. Mitsotakis withheld this information from his recent presentation, his recent speech at the International Trade Fair of Thessaloniki. So this is a concession, and this is not even an obligation under the MOU, under the bailout program. So of course this is a political, if you like, decision, and as our leader said, political responsibility will be sought. So ND wishes to offer the control of the aid to other hands. In this way, Greek society will remain unprotected, particularly at a time of an energy crisis where we have skyrocketing electricity prices. Of course, developments in the PPC follow after the DEPA infrastructure, and 49% of the HEDNO, which used to belong to the PPC, which means that to the Greek people. So we see that the tools used are not the right way for Greece's transition to a green future. We cannot accept a sub-developmental model in the EU, whereas the other countries are doing the exact opposite. They are nationalizing strategic assets and infrastructure. So investors do not undertake any investment risk. They just have guaranteed revenues with the highest yields in Europe. So we see a loss of revenues for the Greek Republic, and we see, of course, that profitability will be the determining factor for DEPA, and we see that an investment fund is the new owner of HEDNO, of DEDIE, and of course we will have a network which will be linked to RES projects and the Mammoth project of smart meters and the development of 5G mobile telephony networks. At a time of an energy crisis, the government is conceding, if you like, the monopolies that were public. This leads to private monopolies in the natural gas sector at a very critical point in time for Greece. I'd like to remind you that even under the bailout programs, we, SYRIZA, were able to withstand the pressure by the creditors asking for a selling of networks. So we proved that it can be done otherwise, that we need to have grids that are in the hands of the Greek public sector. These are tools that we cannot concede. They're necessary for us to achieve climate targets. And these are the networks where the RES will be linked to. So we're talking about smart networks, electromobility, and so on and so forth as well. Another subject that is in the headlines is spikes in electricity. Electricity prices are very high. We know that Greece has the highest cost of energy in the European Union, whereas in the past it was close to the average. We see that Greece is also paying a lot of money for CO2 emissions, and we see that things have changed. Let me tell you that under SYRIZA 2015-2019, according to Eurostat, electricity prices went down by 12%. We reduced VAT from 13 to 6%. We focused on dealing with energy poverty and promoting energy democracy. So if we look at what's happened in the last 2 years, we'll see that consumers pay more and more, and this happened from the very first month of the moment when New Democracy became a government. So we had increases 20% in the PPC utility bills, and this increased the profit margin for competitors and reduced competition and the possible benefit to consumers, because the BBC, which had a dominant position in the market, kept prices at a high level. Then, because of the pandemic and the collapse of the prices in fuels, which is what we experienced in the first 6 months of 2020, we had very high profits for suppliers, including the PPC. They sold a lot much higher than the wholesale price. So this was not rolled over to consumers and thus did not provide any relief to households. So now we have the introduction of the target bundle in November 2020. So PPC continue to benefit from its participation in the balancing market together with its competitors. So there were high prices, and this was at the detriment of consumers. So from the ministry, we saw that there was an increase in the share price of the PPC in the stock exchange, but on the other hand, we didn't look at what was happening to the consumers. So now we have the regulator that decided to legislate in July of 2021, meaning 8 months after the introduction of the target model, showed that there was a distortion in the market, and this is something that needs to be noted. And of course, we also had various activities. We're talking about the green levy on oil, which was created in order to fill the gap that existed in ELAPE. So we know that there are measures to address high electricity prices. But let me say that unfortunately, we still haven't understood, and I don't think that the government has decided on what to do. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the economy and for the households as well. We don't know yet what the increases will be, whereas wholesale prices are moving at higher levels than at the month of August. There are no answers as to what will happen come January, and if the 150 million euro are enough to deal with all these huge increases and where this money will come from. Simply put, we know that we have an account that is used by the government to subsidize expensive prices and is actually rewarding those who are responsible for this hike in prices. I'm from Florina, as I said. I'm an MP representing Florina. So I'd like to say that after having lost our tools to exercise an energy policy, we're trying to implement green transition. The question is how? We have the invisible hand of the market, and this was shown from the pandemic. We see that this hand or arm is not sufficient to carry out the energy transition and to deal with disparities, social disparities. So even though for the first time there is an agreement at a global level on objectives and there are available funds, the political confrontation in Europe and the rest of the world is critical for the future of societies. So the question is, under which conditions will we have this new reality, social, economic, and so on and so forth. So the conflict is how we will achieve the objectives. We all agree on the objectives, but not on how to achieve these objectives. So in Greece, we have the decarbonization attempted by the government in Western Macedonia and Megalopoli, which is in the Peloponnese. And this actually proves in the worst possible way that things are not going well. So we can't leave everything to the forces of the market, because disparities increase and we have social exclusion. So today, we're 2 years after the announcement of decarbonization by the government, by the Prime Minister, and I don't think we've come to a decision yet, to a solution. So what's happened is that there are decisions without local government, without productive partners, there is no transparency, and so on and so forth. So we're talking about the drafting of the plans for just transition. This was without the government. Land use, the governance system, spatial planning, the Escada, and so on and so forth. But we see that these areas are threatened with desertification, and we have a lot of newly unemployed, 3,500 people, and nothing has been done to help them. What about restoration of the lignite mines? This could offer work to those who have lost their jobs. This hasn't started yet. So no remediation has started yet. So the Green Deal, let me remind you, talks about decarbonization and not delignification. However, we see that there is an obsession of the government with natural gas projects, and this means that Greece's commitment is to natural gas, which is a fossil fuel. So we see that even though this money is no longer funded by the EU, 4 new natural gas power stations have been licensed, and we also have the Ptolemaida 5 project. We're still waiting for the PPC's decision on the conversion plan and the financial studies, which will show which is the best solution for this great project, which hasn't entered into operation yet and for which its closing down has been announced. Now, in relation to RES, RES development, RES growth, what has happened in the last few years? We see that there was a so-called simplification of the law, but we've had a confusion, we've had an overheating, and this might lead to an explosion of our effort to move on to climate neutrality. But we need transparency, because we want society to be with us, to walk with us down this path. However, what we run the risk of having is society against us, confronting us. So we believe in decarbonization, not delignification, but in a different way, not the one proposed by the government. So we saw that SYRIZA believed in RES, we needed democracy, we didn't want to have social exclusion, so that society can actually self-produce energy. So we wanted a decentralized model for energy generation, and we created energy communities. 2 years were needed, 3 updates for SDAM and the master plan in order for them slowly to be included in the government's planning. I'm talking about energy communities. So SYRIZA first created the Just Transition Fund, the Reconnection Fund for the most vulnerable households, and also energy communities in order to combat energy poverty. So in our program, we're talking about participation of society. So we want 50% of energy capacity to be produced by small households, energy communities, and other schemes. So we wanted to protect society against social exclusion. We wanted to combat energy poverty. We wanted to maximize generation in the country and to minimize imports. So the government must guarantee transition. It must provide the missing funds. It must help the unemployed and strengthen energy communities. And I'd like to say that energy policy must have cheap energy, good incentives, energy security, small dependence on uncontrollable factors, and environmental protection. Our proposal, as we mentioned quite clearly in June, the Green Revolution, ensures a fair transition, just transition, and makes use of the expertise of a progressive political thinking for the good of the environment and society. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So let me bid you good morning as well. Dear President of the HAEE, Mr. Papaefthimiou, let me thank you for inviting me to your symposium, the sixth Energy Transition Symposium. This has become an institution in energy matters in Greece, and we always see that the main discussion is energy transition. So we're talking about a transition to a new reality different from what we knew until now. There is no return to the old normal. We're talking about a new normal, a different normal, not only in energy, but also in the economy, in society, and politics as well. But how optimistic can we be when looking ahead, when looking at this new normal, and how has the pandemic changed us? What's it like in the post-COVID era? We believe that we can be optimistic, but provided we help shape this new normal with fewer disparities and a smaller rather, environmental impact. And this is why we talk about a green contract which must be concluded between the government, politics, if you like, in general, and society. So things have changed now in the energy sector. So this transition moves from the time when we were predicting the conflict to the actual conflict. So a lot has happened at once. Some people talk about the perfect storm, the perfect energy storm that is looming ahead for this winter all over the world. So we see that climate crisis is on the rise. Gas emissions the prices for gas emissions have gone up. We have an increase in the supply chain cost and logistics worldwide. But even simple problems, for example, we don't have enough truck drivers in Germany and in the UK, but also the fact that there are many things that are unpredictable, so many weaknesses and shortfalls of the Greek energy system. And of course, we have problems in the grid. We have very old and obsolete infrastructure in many cases. So this leads to an explosive mix. And I call this all the stars in the sky related to energy prices that are very high. So we see that there are many problems looming ahead. Many companies, energy companies who did not judge things correctly run the risk of going bankrupt. So what is our answer? Our answer is more energy democracy vis-a-vis this huge number of hikes in electricity prices. So we believe in energy democracy. This is something that we want to talk about. We want to talk about combating energy poverty, but we also want to increase citizens' participation in RES production. So we said that energy transition, in order for the fossil fuels to be reduced, this must be done in a socially just manner. And we must also have guarantees for energy security so that the country doesn't depend on others and is not affected by geopolitical games and disruptions, which is what we're experiencing now with the increase in natural gas prices. So we talked about climate law, and we said that we need to have legally binding targets for an economy without greenhouse gas emissions, a climate neutral economy. So a climate neutral economy, however, is not a politically neutral thing. This means that what we mean is we have to work hard as politicians. Every decision, every measure that is imposed has a social and economic impact. And this is why we need to have special cost-benefit analyses. We also need to look at the social cost, the environmental cost, the footprint, if you like, of all these measures. 2 years ago, we talked about the clause of just transition for lignite areas in order to make sure that social cohesion was maintained and there was efficiency but also stability, energy stability. Nobody listened to us, and instead of that, the government, for communication purposes, did some greenwashing. They put on a green suit, which didn't fit, though. And last August, we were trying to mend the suit, and a lot of lignite power stations were opened up and reoperated, even though they just closed down. So we said that money should be provided or facilities should be granted to olive mills, to farmers, so that they could install small photovoltaics up to 500 kilowatts in order for them to have an alternative source of income. I'm talking about these areas which were affected by the phase out of the lignite power stations. Unfortunately, the government is only interested in doing things for communication purposes. So they lowered the bar, and now the government comes to realize that there are price hikes, and this time it says that it's not to blame, it's what's happening in the global scene. We see that there are spikes in electricity prices. This is very bad for households and SMEs. The government seems to be indifferent to all these oligopolies and oligopoly practices in the energy market, and it insists on privatizing critical infrastructure networks, believing that this is a solution. At the same time, the Competition Committee and the energy regulator, RAEE, without the necessary staff, cannot actually impose transparency and provide information to the consumers on what's happening with the electricity bills. So we see that the consumer groups are not being protected, and it doesn't play an active role. So we see that there's a lot of complacency on the part of the government, bad predictions. Their government, if you like, mistakes, and we believe that this actually is further exacerbated by what's happening in the global scene, and this leads to a perfect storm when we're talking about energy prices. So we believe that the answer to this is energy democracy, transparency, information, active participation of citizens in the energy sector. This means that the citizens must know exactly what they will pay for the electricity bills in a couple of months from now. Of course, they don't know what the adjustment clause is, what the fine print is on the bill, and so on and so forth. So we have to think of consumers as prosumers, so that they are producers and consumers, and this means that they will be able to lower their energy cost. Priority must be provided to energy communities. We see what's happening in Germany, where over 40% of RES projects belongs to citizens who produce their own green energy, and I've been asking the question for 3 years now, why can't we follow the example of Germany and Greece? So energy democracy means that we can immediately move from concentrated models of energy production by means of fossil fuel to decentralized RES, if you like, production units. This is to the benefit of the environment, the consumer as well. This means that we have energy security in Greece. Greece, for example, will not have problems in lignite-affected areas. We don't want these areas to become areas where natural gas is imported. Of course, we see that the government makes conservative choices once again, and even when it comes to expensive electricity prices, it tries to deal with it, but superficially. It doesn't really want to help the households. It moves slowly, too late, too little, too late, and we see that society is struggling. It's been dealt many heavy blows in the last decades, and it's really trying to stand upright. We said that there needed to be interventions in order for us to have transparency in the utility bills, in the electricity bills. We visited the regulator, the energy regulator, and we asked Mr. Draguma a number of questions on how good the announcements were made by the government. So coming away from this discussion, we are even more uncertain about what is happening. Unfortunately, the government does not have a long-term plan to compress, to reduce the electricity cost. These are short-term measures, but are not sufficient to support in the mid-term and long-term the households, SMEs, and the industry. So everybody says that 150 million will not be enough and a lot more will be required. But the government subsidizes indirectly imported natural gas, which is a fossil fuel, and which is the decision that's been made by the government. So the information provided by the regulator shows that a lot of the electricity comes from natural gas, and this may also mean that there's a lot of dependence from a geopolitical point of view. And we see that competition is rather problematic in the Greek electricity market. So the much advertised target model changes the rules all the time. And we don't know exactly what's happening. And the PPC and private suppliers are leading planning the future at a time where there's uncertainty and where there are very prohibitive electricity costs. So we see that the government was actually very happy and patting itself on the back because it received a lot of money from the privatization of DEDIE. Head no. But things are more difficult. So 1.3 billion was the revenue from DEDIE, but this didn't help poor people. What they wanted to do was to support the management of the PPC to sell another 17% of their company, which means that a large part of the energy system is given to third parties. So this was supposedly a success story, i.e. the share capital increase of the PPC. But why didn't the public participate in this share capital increase? Why not? Because it could have gained from the capital gains that would have been generated from the share capital increase. So after the announcement, we see the drop of the PPC share price in the stock exchange. And of course, the Greek Capital Markets Commission is trying to see why there was this big fall in the price of the PPC, because this was some kind of speculation. So at the same time, we see that the grid is no longer a public grid, and we see that the PPC is also being dealt heavy blows. So this means that a lot of measures have been taken. So we see that the measures taken to reduce the energy cost are short-term measures and not sufficient. And we see that the Prime Minister talked about supporting the market, and we see that there was an increase in the megawatt hour in 18 hours from this announcement. I don't want to tire you any longer. So we don't see eye to eye with the government. We see things differently when we're talking about energy transition, particularly after the pandemic. So energy transition must not increase disparities. For example, increased costs, reducing the competitiveness of the economy, creating energy poverty. It must help the households and the SMEs. There must be energy democracy, which means that the footprint for the economy must be small and the environment as well. So we have to restructure, we have to redesign the climate law. This can help us achieve the target. So KIN.AL has always held a responsible position, so we will always be here, we will always put pressure so that energy democracy is implemented correctly. Thank you very much. Thank you. We thank Mr. Arvanitidis and Mrs. Perka. Both MPs gave wonderful presentations. I'd like to ask a question that is for both of you. It's addressed to both of you. I believe that energy transition is a given. It's something that we all support. It's something that we all accept, regardless of our political convictions or our views. Now, what I'd like to hear from you is what your opinion is, what your view is on the mix, a policy mix that Greece must follow in order for us to be able to have a climate-neutral country, a country that respects the environment, but also the way in which citizens live in the country. Let me begin with Mrs. Perka. Of course, As you said, we have common goals, common objectives. Only extremists will not accept the need for an energy transition and the fact that there is a climate crisis. The question is how? Which policies will we use to achieve the targets that have been set? And this is a subject of heated debate between the conservative, the right government and the left progressive governments. And this is something that is seen all over the world. So energy democracy is very important. So we want to reduce disparities. So we believe this is an opportunity. First of all, the production model must change in Greece because we know that natural resources have been exhausted and we've come to the sorry situation. So we talked about the Green Revolution. This is the SYRIZA agenda, our program, and it says that it's very important to have an increased role of the state. And here we see that the state is withdrawing. We can't leave the market forces do whatever they will without any supervision. We're talking about a climate-neutral Greece in 2045, so we're even more ambitious. And here we're talking about the revision of the climate law of Assoc. We want to have more ambitious targets. Climate law is also a pending issue. The rules have to be set soon. And of course, a just transition of lignite areas. That's also very important because they run the risk of desertification. And let me say that when we had the transition, because the production profile with this transition changes. So if the measures are not taken, mitigating measures, we will have destruction and desertification. But if these measures are taken, there are various funds, for example, the Resilience and Recovery Fund and the Just Transition Fund. So maybe we can deal with the problems created by the lignite production. So I'm from Florina. Nothing has happened in 2 years. They're just lovely texts prepared by advisors. Spatial planning, this is very important as well. PPC, for us, it holds a dominant position, so it can intervene when it comes to prices, but it also should play a role in planning. We're talking about biodiversity, circular economy, recycling, all this must be promoted. In any case, when we talk about this, we have 3 goals. One is participation of society, and we have a proposal, 50% of RES should be from energy communities. So these are prosumers. We want the involvement of local societies and we want them to benefit. Second thing, we don't want to have social exclusion. So any planning must be bottom up. We're talking about energy saving, electromobility, because these two, particularly when it comes to electromobility, the program I move using electricity, well, it's not going that well. So it's a different logic altogether. Now, roof photovoltaics. Here are the lower income and middle income households will end up paying twice. What do I mean by this? Someone who cannot green his consumption, his energy consumption, will pay a tax because he will be using dirty energy. So I think this is something the government should look into. We also have a program with all the steps. We have the general principles, which I just outlined. Thank you very much. Mr. Arvanitidis. I don't know if one can add much because in Greece, unfortunately, we're lagging behind. We're like a dog chasing its tail. We try after the event to mend things. We set ambitious targets, but nothing can be achieved without the participation of the Greek citizens. If Greek society believes that others are responsible and a very few will actually be involved, and that citizens who will be called upon to move on to a new reality and without having participated in the shaping of this new reality, then I think that this overall attempt will fail. So we discussed this in Parliament and we talked about young generation. What we need is consensus about climate change. Young people need to participate in this discussion. discussion. So this is an important decision, meaning we can change the conditions in our life, or we will have to do things ex post, after events have happened, and just chase our tail. But that's not the right thing. So people must understand that they can produce electricity. It's very easy. They can put, if you like, rooftop photovoltaics. They can produce and not just consume. So we're talking about Execonomo and other programs, but people must really understand what energy transition means. First of all, you have importing of photovoltaic panels from abroad. You actually have more imports. The other question is, how can there be a benefit for Greek society and for the Greek economy? So we have to change things. We have to move in a different direction, and everybody must come along. Everybody must participate. So here we're talking about economists, about companies, about industries. They're talking about the energy transition. And somebody might say, why shouldn't we have the giga projects, giga PVs? Of course, since we're lagging behind, this must be done. But what about the rest of society? What will happen with them? We know that due to circumstances, due to the conjecture, electricity prices have gone up. But how can the simple people understand this? No matter what you say, they'll end up paying more. It'll be more money out of their own pocket for electricity. And just one more thing. The biggest problem is not what the households will pay. It's the competitiveness of the Greek economy as well. The price hike, we're already at a marginal level. Who will be able to deal with these prices? I'm talking about the production model. These are huge questions that loom large, and we'll be talking about the same things next year when we come to the next symposium. So we just shouldn't chase the targets and try to reach the targets and always lag behind. So I think that anybody risking his capital, and all Greeks, we're on the same side, in the same boat, so we mustn't miss out on this opportunity. We can't pay exorbitant amounts of money for electricity. The first time I was taken aback when I heard that what non-adjustment to climate change will cost 700 billion. These are astronomical prices. Nobody does nothing. We just have announcements upon announcements and just trudge ahead, we move ahead, and so on and so forth. So let us be prepared. Let us do what we can, whether we're politicians, economists, simple people, and everybody involved in the energy sector. So we have to do something. We have to take action now. So time is almost up. This was a very interesting discussion. Maybe next time we should only have a discussion and not presentations. But what I noticed, and this was extremely interesting, was a term used by Mr. Arvanitidis. He talked about a congregation or constellation of stars, all these negative factors, like all these stars in the sky, like a constellation of negative factors. And we heard in the previous panel, we heard this discussion, and Mr. Andriosopoulos talked about the future. So this is what I want to ask, and this is my last question for this panel. So we're talking about a very volatile environment. Everything is volatile and fluctuating. In the last 6 years, we talk about energy transition and the ways we need to follow in this energy transition. So we're talking about this constellation of negative events, negative factors, where there's a lot of uncertainty. So in this negative environment, what is your opinion? Do you believe that things will improve, that we will have a future that from an energy point of view will be secure, because energy security is of major importance, and that it will also support the citizens as well? Or where will we just chase our tail and actually lag behind others in the EU and following others? Do we need to be more active? Do we need to do something different? There are two levels here. Let me speak first. Oh, sorry. So first of all, somebody has to provide an answer. Even though sometimes we talk about extreme circumstances, who didn't know that oil prices would go up? We didn't know in the beginning of the pandemic where people would offload. There was no demand, but this led to a reduction in production. So if you reduce your dependence dependence on oil, and this is done gradually, isn't there a bigger demand for natural gas since you're using it as a bridge fuel? What didn't we understand? Why were we surprised? Why were we taken aback? This was to be expected, and we thought it wouldn't happen. And you see that 50% of energy production comes from natural gas. So this shows that we are vulnerable to changes, that we are affected by these changes in natural gas prices. And this has an impact on the economy. So we're talking about a direct economy. So we need to be able to predict things. So the government needed to have predicted all this. And we're also talking about the price. So we see that what about the excise duties? What about the VAT? Isn't that a decision made by the government? Isn't it up to the government to decide? So these are remedial measures. So what could the country have done otherwise? Because we seem to have this fetish about zero use of lignite. You can't say that. You might need to, what's pressing us? What's forcing us to be absolutely green and not to be using lignite at all? And there is no magic recipe and one recipe. We may be aggressive in one area, but we're also trying to train a society to participate in this situation. So there are no certain stories, success stories. What we want is sustainability in other on planet Earth, not just in Greece. So we're not the only ones. We're all together. Will Greece have its own networks, its own grids? Will it be an exporter? Will energy be a pillar for the economy? We can have a sector of the economy which will be strong. And we're not only talking about self-sufficiency, and we're far from being self-sufficient when it comes to energy, but we also can generate wealth for the country. And someone must talk about this in detail. It's not enough to take these bunnies out of hats and saying that we did great things. So the PPC, what are we going to do? Will we use it? Can we create a company that will lead by its interventions and that can push things forward in the right direction? It's not just the price of a share. It's not enough to introduce new players into the market. And we see that what about these bond issues? This could have been another, if you like, a choice for the PPC. So the thing is, the government, the market, everybody must understand what we are striving for. And the whole planet is moving towards a green, sustainable economy. So we need to clear this up in Greece pretty soon. Otherwise, we'll have this confrontation, diverging views. Some will be the privileged few who will actually make money. This happened, though, in the past as well in Greece, and it didn't pay off. So we have to be smarter if we want to have the future we all deserve and we all would like to achieve at a certain point in time. Things change. They're like quicksand. So you can't use old recipes for a success story in the future. Mrs. Perka, this is a political question because it's got to do with the political targets and the path we want to follow. We could be very optimistic if we followed an example, paradigm where there would be participation of society, but we need to clear things up because there's a problem with the targets as well. And I said this in my speech. We believe in decarbonization, not delignification. That's a part of decarbonization. So here we see that the Prime Minister committed the country on delignitization, and we actually didn't get as many funds as we could have otherwise. And he also brought natural gas. 50% of so what happened was lignite was replaced with natural gas. And the north of Europe is creating an agnostic system. So these are independent of the energy source. So the district heating network was thrown away in Florina. 20 million was thrown down the drain in order for natural gas to be used for heating and cooling. And it was now included, but of course natural gas gas networks are not being funded by the EU, and we have to tell that in 10 years' time, because natural gas is a fossil fuel, it will not be used in 10 years from now. So the future is very ominous for Greece. Why? Because we don't have strategic thinking. Our political targets are not prosperity, and I connect this to a new production model, and this will lead us to a better situation. So what we have is petty interests being served. Sometimes the government is short-sighted. This is the example I have right now in mind, and I think all of us do. So when you plan an energy transition, a green transition, this plan must be taken into account the place where you are now. Also, you should see what the trends are at a European and international level, what the trends are. So Assoc, we're talking now about Assoc and the terrestrial plans, the ones that will be approved by the European Commission and will be financed. Well, they're not in line with the new target, Fit for 55. And of course, this may become more ambitious and not just be 55%. So without a clear plan of this high caliber, we won't get results. And on the other hand, we must admit, and we must all know that these spikes, what we are actually experiencing right now, this has to do with fossil fuels. So RES do not have this volatility. So let's think of it as a large-scale infrastructure project where most of the value is linked to construction and then access. But fossil fuels have this additional, if you like, uncertainty. And of course, then we have very bad policies that were implemented. I don't need to repeat this once again. And I'm talking about manipulation of prices and cartels. These are very serious matters for a country. So I don't think Greece is on the right path, that it's on a democratic path, European path. I don't see society participating in every stage of drafting or drawing up of a plan. Let me take RES, for example. We said no more fossil fuel, no more lignite, no more natural gas. So let's move on to the RES. Renewables, but we don't know about land use. This hasn't finished. And I'm not just talking about spatial planning where there's a problem. We're talking about a special revision for RES. All over Greece, wherever, if you like, they're trying to put wind farms. Some locals object. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. But why is this happening? Why? Because the government has not decided where these projects should be sited or not. Now, we stopped using lignite. We started using natural gas. Why is this the case? Because we didn't have enough RES. But in order for us to have energy efficiency with RES, we need to have storage projects, storage facilities. We're talking about Ptolemaida Peti. It's a 1.5 billion project. They said it will be closed by 2025. We haven't even started building it yet. So a lot of money will be lost. And the government doesn't know what it's going to do with it. So we said, why should it be run on natural gas? Because in 10 years from now, it will have to be discontinued. So what about storage? What about innovation? And this is a global example. There are two models. One model says that 2-3 large investors they leave outside society, they make use of public funds, public money. They actually have no innovation, for example, PVC's wind farms and so on and so forth. And then there's another model. The country digitizes its services, it includes society, it engages society, and there we have investors, local society, a university can have a PhD, a startup can do things, and so on and so forth. This would be a very optimistic scenario, and this is what we opt for. This is what we want, and we have productive proposals for the government on that. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.